Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel, and yes, I am talking about those of you who are viewing the audio version of this show on Spotify and Apple's podcasting platform. Now, you could say that I, in the past, have been a tiny bit, a little bit, somewhat critical of the so-called news organization called the Young Turks. You could say that I operate under the assumption that if TYT says it, there's a 90 to 98% chance that they're dead wrong on their reporting, and not just on their opinions, but on the facts that they're reporting, because that's how bad of an organization TYT has proven to be. However, sometimes you stumble on that 2%. Sometimes you find something where you agree against people who you ardently disagree with, and that moment is magical. But then that leaves us in a bit of a quandary. What do we do in those moments? Do we mock them for admitting that they were wrong and they were foolhardy in their past attempts? Or do we praise them for actually coming on board on issues that are important to you? And I am of the opinion that when people come over to your side, yes, you do in fact praise them for doing so. However, it is funny to mock people who are figuring out the basics of topics they've covered for years later. So today we'll do both. We'll talk about TYT criticizing a criminal justice system that released a man 41 times for crimes like assaulting yet another person, while also mocking their backwards explanations and their denial of the fact that they advocated for policies just like this, and they are in part responsible, and so are their activist progressive friends who think crime and criminal justice is just evil white racism. But before we get into it, we got a sponsor. Let's toss it over to the sponsor and then talk about it on the other side. You guys have to check out Flip City magazine. It is hilarious, and I laugh all the way through reading each and every single issue. And one of the things I absolutely love about Flip City magazine, other than their tireless commitment to comedy, other than the fact that they're 100% independent, other than the fact that they're committed to freedom of speech and they're not going to take censorship by anybody, is that it's actually legitimately good. I mean, check out these covers. You can actually see artists are behind this, comedians, people who are interested in making you a good product are on board. This isn't one of those, oh, it's conservative, so just buy it, idiot. They're actually hilarious. Flip City mocks the same people that I mock each and every day right here on this channel. A lot of people have called them like Mad Magazine before they went woke, but honestly, it's better than Mad Magazine. So go over to flipcitymag.com and get yourself a subscription. We have been searching for something independent and committed to free speech and hilarious, and this is the time to put our money where our mouth is. flipcitymag.com.
A man who has been arrested 41 times for assault has just sent a New York City subway worker to the hospital with a broken collarbone and a dislocated nose. Now, the suspect, Alexander Wright, again, has been arrested for assault 41 separate times. But apparently, that's not enough to keep him out of the public to ensure that people are safe.
Now, Anna Kasparian talks about, and she's upset about the fact, and rightfully so, that this person was able to be arrested 41 separate times for serious crimes, including assault, and yet he was released over and over and over again, despite the fact that Anna Kasparian has advocated for policies like getting rid of cash bail before, and this is the result of those policies. In fact, Anna did an interview with Chesa Boudin, the now thankfully former district attorney of San Francisco, about how she used to support cash bail being removed, but she didn't think it was going to be like this. So yet again, this is an example of the chickens coming home to roost.
So I want to move on to cash bail. I think it's a super important issue. And I feel like it might be one of those issues where we put the cart before the horse because of the fact that crime is classified in very strange ways in this state. I like the way you framed the argument there, and that is how I genuinely believe no cash bail was gonna work. It was going to ensure that, low-level offenders, nonviolent, stuff doesn't land someone behind bars, before they get to see a trial date. So I like the idea of no cash bail for nonviolent offenders. However, there is a problem with the way crime is classified in California, where you have what I would argue are violent crimes being classified as non-serious or non-violent crimes, things like arson, certain assaults. I mean, this list is insanely long. Taking a hostage, how is taking a hostage not considered a serious violent crime.
So what I love about this, other than the fact that it's a left-wing person taking it to Chesa Boudin, one of these woke George Soros, Sean King-backed district attorneys, is that it actually shows Anna Kasparian's utter and complete ignorance, and the fact that she doesn't do research, doesn't look into the issues, or anything like that. Before cash bail, which Anna supported, according to that clip, was implemented, the removal of it, they listed the crimes that were no longer eligible for bail. This was all out there in the open. Anna ignored that. She pretended that the law said what she wanted to say. And now, once again, how many times do we have to see this? Anna Kasparian actually looks into the facts way too late and all of a sudden realizes that she's been backing something that's completely untrue and completely ridiculous. This was all out there in the public. They called it right-wing fear-mongering when people were reporting what was in the bills, and now Anna Kasparian is going to Chesa Boudin and saying, wait a minute, how is taking a hostage not considered violent? Well, Anna, maybe you should have brought that up during the bill phase, because this was something that I and others were highlighting during the bill phase, before it was implemented.
Sister of the victim here, Natasha Nelson, says, I've never in 33 years seen my brother like that. Broken nose, his right side collarbone is broken, okay? And this all happened on August 11th at the Pelham Bay Station in the city's Bronx. The vice president for the Transport Workers Union, Local 100, spoke about Wright's insane criminal record and is wondering why do our workers have to deal with this? How is it that our law enforcement is unable to keep people safe? It's insane. He says, his name's Robert Kelly, if you look at his history, you'll throw up. The system has let society down more than 40 times.
Now, during the course of this video, Anna Kasparian cannot help herself, and she ends up attacking law enforcement for not being able to keep people safe. Now, law enforcement isn't actually obligated to prevent crimes because you can't really do pre-crime, but law enforcement did their job with this guy 41 separate times. It's just that the bail reform law that progressives like the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur particularly, even though they've turned against it, and their allies like Sean King have advocated for, leads to people like this being auto-released time and time again. And of course, that leads to them re-offending, because remember, according to New York State's bail reform law, championed by the progressives, you can't look at somebody's previous history. You can't use the fact that they're being arrested while they're already pending trial for other crimes in order to invoke bail. If you commit a crime that is not eligible for bail, it doesn't matter how many times you do that, you're still not eligible for bail.
And by the way, one of Alexander's past victims was involved in a hate crime as well toward an Asian woman. So Wright, 49, was charged with assault as a hate crime, misdemeanor assault, and criminal possession of a controlled substance, a synthetic form of marijuana called K2, after being accused of attacking an Asian American woman in broad daylight in New York City's Chinatown. Now, we're going to show you the video of what he did. It's difficult to watch, so I want to give you that warning. But without further ado, this is a man who's been arrested 41 times and is just released back onto the streets to assault other people.
You okay?
Now, I had to cut the video for YouTube's terms of service, but yet again, what we saw here was a sucker punch, and this time it was of this Asian woman who appeared to be in her 40s, maybe in her 50s, and she immediately hits the ground, and this guy starts shouting at other people who are looking at him weird. And remember, this isn't even the assault that he was arrested for recently. This was a previous hate crime against this Asian woman that he was charged for, and it was an unprovoked sucker punch to a tiny Asian woman who may have been elderly directly in her face. He was auto-released after this, again, due to the bail reform that people like TYT, Sean King, all these progressives advocate for. This happened in Manhattan, where a woke Sean King-backed district attorney, Alvin Bragg, you remember him as the guy who charged Jose Alba with murder and tried to hold Alba in prison on a $500,000 bond, let him go over and over again. They downgrade the charges, and this is what we see. This is criminal justice reform. This is what TYT advocated for.
Yeah, this is unacceptable. This is 100% unacceptable. I'm done with this. Whatever this is not criminal justice reform.
Anna, you're wrong. This is criminal justice reform. This is what you specifically asked for. You said that the system was systemically and structurally racist against black people and that we needed to make changes because you didn't like the crime statistics because they were unequal outcome. So we now don't treat crimes very seriously, and we're very conscious of who's being arrested rather than what the people being arrested are actually doing. This guy was black, therefore he is privileged, and he would skew the statistics if we were to hold him in jail. Think about the racial disparity in our jails and prisons, so they let him out over and over again. That's the point of bail reform law. That's why Shaun King advocated for bail reform law, because the statistics, which reflect reality, make people like you uncomfortable.
Allowing people who are clearly a threat to public safety, allowing people who are assaulting and hurting workers as they're just trying to do their jobs and get through the day, unacceptable. How are we allowing this to happen?
So, if you haven't noticed, based on the title and based on Anna Kasparian saying workers, they're trying to put a stupid communist spin on this issue, even though, again, all of these fellow travelers with the Young Turks, all of these commie sympathizers are the ones who are trying to get these criminals back on the streets. In fact, they're the ones who advocated for the basically decriminalization of a bunch of these property crimes because the law enforcement is an evil agent of capitalism and they're not trying to do public order. They're not trying to have a safer society. They're just trying to protect the capital owners. That's why we don't have anybody going to jail for shoplifting anymore, because it's just merchandise. They're big chains. They have insurance. All the other excuses that Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur put forward about the rioting are all codified in law.
Yeah.
This is it? This is criminal justice reform?
Yes, Anna, that is criminal justice reform. And the reason we're quote unquote allowing this to happen is because of people like you.
That ain't it. Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, this is not an isolated story. This is happening in major cities across the country, dozens of stories, nonstop. And there's something seriously wrong here.
Yes.
So we can't have someone being arrested 41 times and they're back on the streets.
Again, I agree with Cenk on this, but the reason I'm making this video, the reason I find this so funny, is because people at the Young Turks will use the fact that somebody is arrested over and over again and that they're black as evidence of systemic bias against that person. So now Cenk's like, oh, we can't have somebody arrested 41 times and be back on the streets, when Cenk before was like, oh my god, this guy was arrested 41 times. He must be an innocent angel being harassed by the evil racist police. That is just evidence of the systemic structures of structural systemic discrimination. How dare we go so hard on these innocent minorities that are just trying to live their lives?
But you have to be balanced and you have to actually seek justice, because that's what progressives are. We're not like the right wing paints a caricature of progressives. Oh, you guys want to make everything racial, etc. No, this isn't a racial issue. So we care about that Asian woman just as much as we care about anybody else. Anthony Nelson, who was attacked in the subway, the first story Anna told you, is black. This has nothing to do with race. This has nothing to do with injustice.
So now Cenk is saying, oh, the right wing paints a caricature of the left wing, saying that they're trying to make everything racial. And look at this. We have an Asian victim and we have a black victim. Do the story out of Queens, New York about the anti-white hate crime perpetrated by black people. Do any of those stories, Cenk, and then I'll believe that it's totally about the victims and you don't care about the race or the makeup of these situations.
We care about that Asian woman just as much as we care about anybody else. Anthony Nelson, who was attacked in the subway, the first story Anna told you, is black. This has nothing to do with race. This has nothing to do with injustice.
Also interesting that the victims in this case, when they're Asian and when they're black, have races, but the person, the perpetrator, the man who's actually committing these crimes, Cenk doesn't see the race. It's not relevant to mention to you. Now, it's one thing if that was a consistent standard over at TYT to not mention the race, but he just mentioned the race of the victims. He talked about how it's not racial or anything like that. If this was a white person, they would definitely headline this with white man arrested 41 times. So it's just interesting that this is how Cenk's brain works.
In fact, letting a guy keep assaulting people over and over again is injustice.
Yeah.
So if you're a progressive, you should be looking to have this man imprisoned for a long time. If you're not getting it.
Cenk, I don't know if you know this, but the progressive train, and you signed on to some of this rhetoric, is all about defunding the police, abolishing prisons. So no, if you're a progressive, if you're one of these hardcore people, you don't want prisons to exist, not this guy to get a lengthy sentence. This is the exact outcome we should expect from the implementation of progressive criminal justice policies. You just don't like it, but you're trying to reframe it within your worldview rather than admitting that progressives are dead wrong on this issue. Shaun King, call him out, Cenk, by name, is fighting against any efforts to change bail reform in New York State in order to make our system sensible, while he lives on a wealthy lake house property in Jersey, so he doesn't have to deal with the consequences of his own actions.
That what he did to that woman there, that he's done now dozens of times, is not within miles of justice. It's the exact opposite of it. And by the way, there's a second component to this story and the other ones that Anna's going to tell you about. They constantly target the working man.
Yes.
Because if they target rich people, then they're actually going to get arrested. They're actually going to be in a lot of trouble. They're actually going to get put away for a long time.
They always got to throw in the communist gobbledygook. The reason rich people aren't targeted by these criminals as often is not because they won't be let out. Remember, the actor that was assaulted recently, that was another guy who was just randomly striking people, had been arrested a bunch of times, and they kept repeatedly letting him out. The reason they don't target rich people is because rich people have the means to move out of areas that implement wildly crazy, stupid progressive policies. They can avoid these criminals. And I wish that somebody on the internet.com, some guy who had Justice Warrior in the name of his channel, in the name of his podcast, actually did stories and brought up statistics about how, of course, if you're in poverty, you're more likely to be victimized by criminals. In fact, statistically, you're something like 10 times more likely to be robbed if you make $7,500 a year versus if you made a middle class salary of around $50,000. If only somebody did videos about how crime actually creates poverty and the people who are victimized are the good people in those neighborhoods who are just trying to get themselves out of that poverty. If only those videos existed somewhere on the internet.com.
But when they keep going after the working class, nobody's there to help them.
Yeah, Cenk, the reason why is because you have demanded that we restrict the police. You have demanded that we tied their hands. You have demanded that we remove the police from the neighborhoods where crimes occur because you don't like the fact that the neighborhoods where crimes occur are not racially proportionate, and therefore there are more arrests in those areas.
But when they keep going after the working class, nobody's there to help them. And nobody's there to fight back, and no one's there to fight for justice. As progressives, we're supposed to be fighting for justice no matter what. So let's stick up for each other and make sure we get justice for those victims too.
Welcome aboard, Cenk. These are all the things that I've been saying for years on this channel about the consequences of lax criminal justice policy. The people who are hurt the most are the people who can't afford private security or to move out to the burbs in order to get away from the criminals.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you're right about this happening in most major cities. It happens in Los Angeles as well. And just to give you a Los Angeles angle to a very similar story, Metro workers at Union Station were begging the authorities for some protection. There was one Metro worker, a female, who was dragged into the bathroom and assaulted. I mean, there was case after case. Luckily, they're represented by a union that, had some power in persuading the government, the local government, to provide extra security for these workers.
So right now, Anna's talking about the Metro workers and how they were begging for law enforcement to be returned to the area. By the way, this is a similar thing that we saw from the MTA workers in the New York City subway. But the thing is, Los Angeles, like a bunch of these other departments, reduced the police budget, and they also reduced enforcement of what is called fare evasion when people jump the turnstiles in New York. So the officers have no purpose there, because what they would normally do is, because they figured out that people who don't pay for the subway or people who commit crimes typically don't pay for the subway, was that if you arrested people for not paying for the subway, you could actually prevent downstream crimes. This was one of the aspects of broken windows policing, which of course the Young Turks are against. So now they're like, oh, they had to beg them after policy shifted because we advocated for policy to shift, and look at all the crime that was going on in these stations. Yes, Anna, we all knew that. That's why broken windows was instituted in the first place. That's why they targeted specifically the crime of fare evasion, because it turns out all these crazy criminals don't care all that much about paying the fare, so it was a way to get these people off the streets before they did something seriously violent. You called that criminalizing poverty, so guess what? They didn't want to criminalize poverty anymore, and it turns out a lot of people got victimized. Great job, Ann.
Okay, but what we're also noticing in Los Angeles is, depending on where you live, if you're lucky enough to afford a wealthier area in Los Angeles, you're protected by private security at this point. That's where we're at. So it is an overall problem with our justice system.
Anna says this like she's breaking news. Anna says this like she's shocking anybody. Obviously, the people who can afford it get themselves private security, especially when law enforcement was lax. This is why people have often described defund the police as defund your police, because the people who support it, and by the way, the biggest indicator of supporting defund the police is making at least 6 figures in the United States of America, can afford their own police to protect themselves. This is wealthy, idiotic liberals that are not connected to reality, that think that the criminal justice system comes out of slavery. It was evil white racists just trying to catch black people, advocating and supporting candidates for these policies. And obviously they're going to shield themselves to the extent that they can from the negative implications of those policies. This was obviously going to happen. I talked about this way back when. I talked about the propensity for the people in poverty that aren't criminal to be victimized far, far more, but you ignored all of this, Anna. Jank, you said, no big deal. We have to address the systemic structure systems and whatever, because remember, Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd for around 9 minutes. Are you feeling like George Floyd is saved yet, Anna? When somebody gets out after 41 arrests, does that make you feel like George Floyd's memory is being honored? Maybe we should call that what it was, an isolated incident, and talk about the negative implications of the structural defects that you guys put in the criminal justice system.
I believe that local law enforcement is on an unofficial strike because they're having a little temper tantrum because people dare to want to hold them accountable for shooting and killing unarmed individuals who do not pose an imminent threat to them, because they're freaking cowards and they don't want to do their jobs.
And there we go. Anna Kasparian could not let this video go by without saying F the police. She hates the police. The police are definitely bad, but also please let the police save us. Anna, again, arrests are up. The police are actually locking these people up. Remember, the story that you're talking about, the headline, is a person arrested 41 times and released due to progressive bail reform that doesn't allow you to hold these people. I did a story out of a neighborhood called Chelsea in New York City, where the police have arrests up about 30%, but all of these people are being released within minutes and they go right back to the neighborhood. So no, the police aren't on an unofficial strike. They might be pulling back in certain places due to the Ferguson effect, which you deny. And by the way, Anna, you, Jank, and everybody on your network promoted those lies around Michael Brown, which led to the Ferguson effect, but arrests are up. The police are doing what they're supposed to be doing. You're the idiots that changed the bail laws. You're the people who said, oh, no big deal if you steal all this stuff. It's not like thieves move on to other crimes. Whatever. Don't worry about it because progressive.
So that's number one. And then on the other hand, you have people who live in like La La Land, utopia, where they think, no, we need to abolish all prisons, abolish all police, and just let these maniacs go around assaulting and killing innocent people, including workers. Unacceptable. I ain't about that.
Anna, I don't know if you know this, but the man that's sitting next to you is a man named Cenk Uygur. He helped found an organization called Justice Democrats. The biggest politicians advocating for abolishing prisons and abolishing the police are the Justice Democrats. So maybe turn some of your ire to the man sitting next to you, because he blundered in ways that we cannot possibly imagine. And unfortunately, the most famous progressives in Congress are the ones championing these issues. And yes, it has an effect. On top of that, you gotta love Anna saying innocent people, and some of them are workers.
And just let these maniacs go around assaulting and killing innocent people, including workers. Killing innocent people, including workers.
Because, you know, if they weren't workers, if they were the evil capitalists, I guess they deserve to die. I know Anna's trying to work in her communist nonsense, and that's not what she meant. I'm just making fun of her. Everybody relax. But it is funny that she's so hopped up on this communist garbage, despite the fact that her fellow travelers are pushing the thing she's railing against, that she's separating innocent people and saying, well, the innocent people that are workers, those are the ones that she's worried about. Funny how communism can damage your brain to such an extent.
So a perfect example of that happened the other day. day where we had this guy who did shot a cop, killed him, right? And in the middle of a robbery, it's as bad as it gets. Turns out he was out of jail when he had committed a terrible crime. He had hit his girlfriend, dragged her around by her hair, etc. And so why was he out? Well, it's the two things that Anna mentioned. One, prosecutors gave him a comically low sentence, 180 days. He'd already served 54. He's only going to serve 130 days for a terrible crime to his girlfriend, who should have gotten justice, right? Instead, he's out in the street and kills a cop. But wait a minute, did he actually even serve the 130 days? No.
It was 180, and no, he didn't serve.
No, but he had served 54 already, okay, for being in prison. So did he serve the rest? No, because the sheriff's office let him go after 1 day. And when you ask the sheriff's office, why the hell did you do that? They're like, oh, well, if the prosecutors aren't going to give them real sentences, no, you should ask them. No, I'm asking you, why did you let him out in 1 day? Okay, so and I'm asking both of you, what is wrong with you guys? Protect actual citizens.
So what's great about this is that Cenk thinks he found something where he can blame the progressives for the comically low sentence, but also blame the sheriff, because he says the guy was in jail for 54 days, and then he only made him serve 1 day, and then he let him out, and then Cenk mischaracterizes what the guy said about the real sentence and all that, just so he can blame the sheriff, saying that the sheriff did wrong in this scenario because he should have at least been serving the pitiful sentence given to him by the California, whatever district attorney was involved. But the thing is, I know Los Angeles and California's state law better than Cenk. So what Cenk doesn't know, because he's a buffoon, is that when you give somebody a sentence, they're only required to serve somewhere between half and 2/3 of it. So this guy would have been eligible for release according to that number, which again, he had a 180-day sentence if he served 90 days. Now, the thing is that you might not know is that if you're waiting in jail pre-trial, as we learned from the Lance Lowe situation, your days count double. So in reality, when the sheriff released him after 1 day, he was probably obligated to do so because he got double time, was already over the 100-day threshold according to California state law, and since he only has to serve half to about 2/3 of the sentence, this qualified him for immediate release. So yes, Cenk, you should talk to the prosecutor, you should talk to the progressives. This is what you advocated for.
Yeah, this system is just so incredibly broken, and
Anna, this is what you bought. This is what you paid for. This is what you asked for. Now that it's arrived at your door and you've opened the box, you decided that you didn't like it. But guess what? There's no return policy. This is what you signed on for, and now you have to deal with it. And the idea that you're going to go on from this and propose the allegedly common sense reforms that are going to solve the problems while not letting the criminals run roughshod is absurd. Listen to what Anna advocates for right after this.
After all of the protests and all of the calls to do common sense things, okay, and qualified immunity, so cops maybe think twice before they just decide to open fire and kill people that are running away from them and clearly do not pose an imminent threat.
So the first thing that Anna talks about as a policy that would not cause crime to spike is an end to qualified immunity. Now, for those of you who are unaware, what qualified immunity essentially does is say that when a police officer is performing his actions as an officer, you can't sue him personally. You have to sue the police department or the city or the municipality or the state or whatever. Now, the reason this was fine for years is because when people typically sue, they don't want to extract money from the individual salary of the police officer. They want to get money from where the money actually is, which is the department, the city, the state, etc. However, leftists have figured out that you could essentially stop police officers from doing anything if you bog them down in a bunch of frivolous lawsuits. So the reason they want to end qualified immunity is not because they feel like it's this thing that grants police all this status or whatever. It's because they want to sue them personally, thus disincentivizing police officers from doing anything. Now, should there be reductions here or there, or should the standard be lowered on when you can actually sue a police officer from what actually falls from without their line of duty requirements? Sure, but the idea that you throw this whole thing out and that's a sensible thing and that will drive down crime is absurd. You want cops to do absolutely nothing? Make it so that they have to deal with every single frivolous lawsuit based on every single scumbag criminal that just wants to hurt them. Now, to really hammer this point home, I want you to think of a different situation. Let's say you're at a Walmart, you slip and fall on a wet floor because the spill wasn't cleaned or because they didn't put that caution wet floor sign. Typically, in that scenario, you don't want to sue the individual Walmart employee, even though they individually made the mistake, because they have no money. There's no way that they're going to be able to compensate you for your injury. You want to sue Walmart corporate for failing to train their employees in such a way so that this didn't happen. The same is true for the police. Individual officers don't have the money to compensate you for your injuries, so suing them is for the purpose of bankrupting them, and it's supposed to have a deterrent effect on other officers because anything they do can be subject to lawsuits. We don't have a loser pay system in the United States of America, and that will basically end policing. There's a reason why the Abolish the Police crowd are on board with ending qualified immunity. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't certain instances where we can make exemptions to qualified immunity, but that's not what's being argued for. What's being argued for is getting rid of it altogether. And again, look at the cases that they cite as examples for why they want to get rid of it. I mean, one of the cases that actually brought this to the forefront was the Michael Brown case, which according to the forensics was the cleanest shooting possible in those circumstances. Officer Darren Wilson 100% acted in self-defense. If you don't know that and you say you care about Mike Brown, I guess you didn't care to read the first 8 pages of the Department of Justice report on it or the other subsequent investigations that showed that Officer Darren Wilson was in the right. Well, guess what? The Brown family tried to sue Officer Darren Wilson and the case was dismissed due to his qualified immunity. This is what led a lot of the activists to want to get rid of it because they wanted to bankrupt Officer Darren Wilson even though his actions were clearly and obviously by multiple witnesses and by the forensics objectively morally in the right in that scenario and totally called for. So yeah, this wouldn't help anything.
Reform our prisons. Nothing done about that. Prisons are still a place where people go to become hardened criminals as opposed to people who get rehabilitation so they can go back into society as normal, productive people, right? None of that is happening.
Now, the next thing is a total misdirect by Anna Kasparian. She's like, why didn't we fix prisons so that when you go into jail or go into prison, you come out a more productive member of society, a good plus person, and you get an engineering job, whatever. In reality, if we could do that, we would do it. Turns out, a lot more easier said than done. This is why this isn't the actual purpose of prisons. The purpose of prisons, and I did a whole video about this, is to put people behind bars to mechanically lower the crime rate. You're trying to remove them from society so they can't offend in society. The idea that we should judge them based on a standard that they're not intended to fulfill is absurd. And we have gotten this issue about how prisons are somehow making people more criminal, and how that has produced in policy was that we started letting a bunch of people out of jails and prisons because we don't want them to turn into hardened criminals. And what do we ultimately end up seeing is that the people that we let out were on that path in the first place, and they ended up committing more crimes.
All we got out of all of those protests is now like this total hands-off approach where people can go around assaulting people and robbing people all they want with absolutely no real consequences. Drives me crazy. And anyone who defends that is wrong.
Name names, Anna. Tell us who's wrong. Tell Sean King that he's a dumb idiot and he needs to shut that nonsense down.
Okay? You cannot pretend to be in favor of workers and ensuring that they're safe, that their working conditions are great, when at the same time you provide cover for criminals who are victimizing them like this.
Anna, stop obsessing about workers in the workplace. These crimes happen all the time. It happens to people who are not working. One of the crimes that you showed was an Asian woman just walking when she got clocked in the face. Stop trying to make this about class warfare, whatever, when you, one of the elitists, are the one who advocated for this. You were the ones who were like, well, it's just property when people were looting the stores. And it turns out when you allow robberies to go on in stores, sometimes people who work in those stores get hurt because criminals don't care about them.
So there's a story out of Denver of this poor bus driver that had this great route. She would drop people off at their work, at school. They knew each other. It was like a story right out of Americana. That was before the epidemic. Now, because of fentanyl, it's a nightmare. It's a house of horrors on the bus stop. People constantly yelling at her. People getting killed on the bus.
Literally getting killed on the bus. There was a man who beat a woman to death and tossed her body on the side of the road. Imagine being a bus driver, how terrifying that is. to witness that and feel no protection.
So yeah, they wrap up with telling other horror stories, other things that bother them, but make no mistake, this is what they wanted, this is what they bargained for, and I'm glad that they're turning around on it, and believe me, to the extent that they're actually going to support getting rid of the candidates that institute these policies, I'm with them. But we gotta laugh at the fact that they're trying to frame this as this workers versus capitalists thing, when before they were cheering on the riots because it was just the capitalist corporations being robbed. These are the consequences of letting criminality go unchecked. These are the consequences of pretending that racially disproportionate outcomes were due to racism rather than disproportionate behavior, and the Young Turks should really acknowledge that they're wrong and stop advocating for even stupider policies or misdirecting to the police, when in reality it is lax criminal justice policies through and through that are responsible for your peril. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about TYT coming around but still being wrong. Till next time.